chance to answer before he has to leave. Again, if you have questions, jot them down, and then after the break, you'll have plenty of time to ask questions of Kevin from Cleveland Jewish News and from John Nagy. That's the other thing. John Nagy is joining us for the pilot rather than David Warnoff. David, a good friend of his, wife passed away, and the funeral was scheduled. So
we are streaming.
A little bit of background on this panel. Move through. Okay. So so John will be replacing David tomorrow as well. Tomorrow evening is the group dinner at Salam. You don't have to come if you don't want to. There's room for everyone. Okay. If you plan not to attend tomorrow evening, though, let either Jocelyn or I know, because we need to call the restaurant to let them know.
I'll carry it around the meeting. Okay.
All right. The food will be provided to you at no cost. Okay. Alcoholic beverages, however, because the university is not allowed to buy alcoholic beverages, those will be on you. Okay. All right. Soft drinks, obviously, the university covered. They have some wonderful homemade teas there, delightful teas, not sweet. So, I won't hurt your dental work. All right. So the plan, as with yesterday, I will have the timer. You'll hear if the time runs out, you'll hear the sound. I'll give you each 20 minutes, not Chris. Okay. And I will drive the slide. So when you want to advance the slide.
Okay, so we have a camera for this, right? On him.
I will start when you say go. Go. Okay.
All right. Good afternoon, colleagues.
Yeah.
You want to reset it in 11 seconds.
11 seconds.
Yeah.
But why don't I see others? No, this is
The diary as well. It says tea somewhere here. I know, right? So that's the thing. So I thought I'd share this just to start off my presentation. We are surrounded by journalists, and me not being a journalist myself, I have to lead by example. We always tell them, guys, be storytellers. So I'll give it a jab at it and be a storyteller. Tell you about a story about this little boy growing up in a very small town called Gaborone, which so happens to be the oldest town in South Africa. The population just over 36,000, which is almost the same population complement as Ohio University's student population. So it's a very small town, very little opportunities happening there, and this town is situated in Eastern Cape, which is a Xhosa-speaking town. And the rite of passage for a young boy is to become a man. So you go to the bush, And then after you come back from the bush, you kind of pretty much told to go out there and make it happen. So this small little boy, having matriculated, went to Johannesburg, the city of gold. But growing up in Graaff-Reinet, he was exposed to a lot of political content because his parents were very involved in politics in the community. Robert Sobukwe is also from our town. And he was also interested in politics because he used to watch beta cassettes about cry freedom and power of one. But then when he matriculated and he went to Johannesburg, he realized very quick that despite it being the place of gold, not all that glitters is gold. So he lost his passion for politics and lost his passion for trying to pursue social sciences studies. And he opted into the more lazy part, which is visual communication. So he studied graphic design and multimedia design, graduated there and was absorbed into a company which is called Caxton Local Newspapers, which is the biggest community media group in pretty much South Africa, and I'd like to say the biggest in sub-Saharan Africa. All right, and they're also massive commercial printers as well. So my time, this little boy, sorry, I thought I'm telling a story, so I'm talking about this little boy, not me. He then grew very quick within the company because after a year of working there, they identified him as being the perfect candidate to start up a digital department. This is now 2019, 2020, 2010, where pretty much, 2019, 2020 is in our heads, isn't it? Because of COVID-19, but anyway, 2019, 2010. And digital was not really a thing there. Editors and the people that he was working with at the time saw him as an IT person that's there to steal their jobs or to kind of encourage them to break the news before it goes into the newspaper. They were a weekly publication. So he set up this department as the first ever for the Caxton Group, which is a massive group, as a pilot program. So he had to hire and fire. And he did a fantastic job, I might say so myself, because he managed to apply change management tactics to newsrooms, making them realize that digital was not really a disruptor, it was actually an enabler to secure future jobs and opportunities for them. So he successfully did that and got a phone call from the CEO, Bruce Sturgeon of the Caxton Community Newspapers, and said, I want you to be my right-hand man, digital right-hand man. So this little boy shared an office right next to the CEO of the Caxton Group. He traveled to the UK, Johnson Press, Local World, was exposed to a lot of information, but then realized very quick that decisions were not being made in boardrooms. The decisions were made by the people that owned the company, and they were sitting in George, which is very close to Stellenbosch. All right, so very quick, he realized that he needs to be at grassroots level. That's when they redeployed him to the capital city, which is Pretoria. And in capital city, he looked after a stable of newspapers, 10 stable of newspapers with a 37,500 copy distribution or print order per week. And now he had to manage over 80 staff members, which editors, journalists, drivers, and also 110 runners who did knock and drop door-to-door distribution. But then the pressure was mounting because the company he was managing was owned by 3 rivals, Caxton, Independent Media, and Media 24, all owning one company. So that was very interesting because he now realized that everyone was going after profits, and it was very difficult for him to actually pursue what he wanted to do. So that's when he jumped, and now he's standing right here in front of you, being a founder of, one of the founders of Mediate Media. The other founder is right there, that's my wife. And we looked at it and said, look, we need to be purpose-driven instead of profit-driven. We need to get into finding a way to launch publications that are really going to mean something. The first publication we launched was Student Living. The capital city is one of the cities that have a number of very good tertiary institutions. And every single year, without fail, school leavers come in droves to the capital city, and they find themselves prey to prostitution, find themselves prey to human trafficking, and also property fraud by scams. Give me a deposit and we'll secure your accommodation, because they come there from different places of the country and they don't really have a credible media source that they can rely on. They've got Gumtree and BidObuy and other platforms and Facebook as well. So we decided to launch a publication that was going to be for the students, by the students, but also have content that really helps those people that come to the capital city to have access to content. But it was very difficult to start out with because the print costs were high, and also being a designer and an entrepreneur. For me, I applied design thinking,
when it comes to anything that I do. It needs to be practical, it needs to work. So that is why our newspaper is totally different. It's like a hybrid between a magazine and a newspaper. So we applied a lot of thinking behind how best will this resonate with our readers. Then we found ourselves in a difficult position because we didn't have journalists, and we said, okay, let's MacGyver this. Let's find a way. So that's when we started going out, having MOUs with different institutions to say, can we be part of the workplace integrated learning, which is, for the Americans that might not know it, I'm sure it's something that you guys do here as well. Workplace integrated learning is pretty much an opportunity for students who are studying journalism to serve in the field. Internships, yeah, done. So that's when we realized we're actually sitting on gold, because we can monitor, we can mentor these students, we can also give them guidance, but we can also monetize and keep the publication running. So yes, some people might say it's exploitation, but it's not. It's just giving them a platform to actually express themselves. All right. So 2020 hit, we stopped printing the publication. We started off with 20,000 copies, and we were doing fantastic. We had advertisers from Boston City campus, which is a rival to major universities. It was an alternative, really. And we had partnerships with university FMs like Tux FM, which is catering for the target market that we were appealing to. We also had property developers, because that's where our cash cow was going to be. That we were going to go and find the property developers and also student accommodation owners and let them advertise here consistently to sustain us, because every single year we would not run out of students and they will not run out of clients. So that's what we thought would be a sustainable publication. Unfortunately, they stopped advertising because of COVID-19, and students had to work from home, and there was not really a market there. But luckily, we were forward thinking. We had an online platform, and we were servicing our community on the website. Now, I'm sharing about student living and what we do. But recently, we kind of pivoted because we realized that we're not going to be making that much money with student living. Not that it's all about the money, but we needed to sustain something. We needed to diversify our publishing division of our company, which is Mediate Media. How am I looking on the time?
You got 10 minutes left.
10 minutes, all right. So now I've spoken about myself, I've spoken about student living. I want to talk to you about Ndu News. During 2020, we launched a publication called Ndu News. Ndu is a spirit of Ndu, Abantu, but it's a spirit of Ndu, which is a massive movement in Africa right now. And it's really about, embracing the you, the Ndu, and also publishing in isiXhosa, etc. So the publication is in Eastern Cape, in East London. It is co-owned by myself and by my wife. And we are servicing a market that is twofold. Some of the readers are in rural areas, so the chiefdoms and kind of like Xhosa clans, and then the other market is actually in East London, which is more metropolitan environment. So that publication is not doing that great, but we're still going to see how best we can find solutions here from this trip. Now, let me talk to you about Mediate Media, the publisher and the mother company of all these things that we're doing. So Mediate Media is a multifaceted company. We have publishing as a division, but we also have digital services like graphic design, development of websites, etc. And we service some of the clients here. Our clients are here. Dunisan is my client as well. And yourself, you're soon to be client. AIP is a client as well. So that part of the business is doing very well, and it actually is helping on the publishing side of the business. However, we realize that the publishers in South Africa, they don't have money, especially the independent publishers, and that's where we want to play. So what we've done now is that we have started asking for a little bit of equity from these independent publishers in exchange for services that we have. In a way, we are diversifying our stable of publications because we are part owners of some of the independent publishers. This puts us in a position whereby when we do approach the Bill Gates Foundation or my good friend over there, we can come through and say, we are Mediate Media and we represent this stable of publications, as opposed to them operating in silos and going, asking for pennies as individuals. Because that's how I think Mediate Media can make a massive impact. And just to end off, Mediate Media is spelled, well, our company is me and a D and an 8, which is a conversation starter because people think we're in a medical space, it's a Med 8 Media. but it's actually mediate media. We mediate between what the solution is. That's the design thinking that we apply throughout our business. I have lots more slides. You can go to the last one because I hardly even gone to the slides, and I hope that I've shared a little bit about my business and you've got an understanding of what we do. We have a staff complement with my wife, the sales consultants, and myself, number one. And yeah, student living, our readers, you can see they're very young and really, really not exposed to too much. You can go, Bill. And I want you to go to the last one. Okay, that's our offices there. These are our publications. That's our website. Okay, fantastic. So we've got Nkezo, Ntsika, and also when we launched into news, which you can't see over here, we actually got what's his name, the actor, to be part and parcel of the activation for that publication, because at that time we realized that we needed to kind of like get the hype, get the sexy back into print. So we decided to go with getting him involved as well, handing out street lights, etc. You can move to the next one. All right, that's my boy. I put that on purpose there. That's my boy. I put that on purpose. You can go back. He can look at you. Okay. So the thing is, for me, it's really about him, because if those students going to the capital city for student living, I mean, capital city where we are servicing with student living, he's going to end up being similar to those kids that are taken a prey for and are found in compromising situations. I want to see what I can do right now to make sure that his future is guaranteed. I want to make sure that he's safe in future. And also I want to make sure that I'm making impact and not just focus on profits, but also focus on the purpose. And that's pretty much the mantra or mantra, or whatever you may call it, of our company, our organization, and all that we do. Thank you so much.
Lots of time for questions.
All right. I'm running away.
Somebody made a crack about you loving a camera and now you fear them.
Yeah, no.
Peter has a question.
Ibo.
How you founded your concept, especially when you discussed issues relating to students getting scammed. And that's really common, where a child would pay money to unknown people in the hope of getting an apartment, and they end up not getting it. And if you're creating awareness along these scams, I think that's a very good job you're doing. We must really commend you. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I'd like to
You're
just,
doing a great job.
you give me an opportunity to pitch. So thank you so much. I think the vision for student living is really to be one day a supplement in all your newspapers, because I do strongly believe that if we just flip the script a little bit and say, how can we collaborate as publishers? How can we make others stand up? That's the spirit of Ubuntu. So for example, your publication could have this as UCT insert in your publication. We sell it, you insert it, you make money.
Maybe partnering with people that are renting out student accommodation to be part of your publication.
Yeah.
They'll bring in the income and somehow they would find you really valuable to them.
Thank you, sir.
You must go to Cape Town as well.
You'll take me there.
So,
Thank you.
so-
Do you want if I ask a question?
Please do.
So, are the universities there more or less synchronized? Like they all start up at the same time, they all end at the same time? So like, is there a move-in period and a move-out period?
Yeah.
And do you have special content for that that's more or less, you can just use it year after year after year?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think we all can attest to this as being South Africans. It's a last minute decision, or rather not last minute decision. It's just that people come in droves without even having applied to go into a tertiary institution. So they line up in long queues and they want to get into the university, let alone where they're going to sleep that night. So you have a lot of people literally sleeping outside campus because they want to get in for tuition. Just that's the problem. So every single year it has not been fixed. Now administration from the universities, etc. Not the ones that we are having MOUs with, but in essence, every single year it's the same. And also the universities are synchronized. So there is a period where they go to break, like here, and there's a period they come in.
Here has developed they call it the move-in guide. And so it's the same content pretty much every year. They rebrand it every year to keep it a little fresh. They update things and things like that. But it's basically, everything you welcome to Athens. You're terrified. Here's everything you need to know to survive your first few days.
Sure.
Big money maker.
Yeah. You see, Bill, sorry, this is the last thing, and then I'll step aside. I think the model here is really and that's Mediate Media's thinking, is that with the partnerships and the stake that we're having for these publications, we can also have different shoots of other things, whether it is motoring, specific niche markets, whether it is parenting, et cetera, et cetera. Because I do strongly feel that independent publishers work in silos. And if there is a glue, which is a mediator in a sense, you know, that will bring the revenue to you in a sense of saying, look, we want to put this in your publication, we'll make it look so much thicker. Then you be the carrier. Sorry to call it that, because that's a swear word in our space. We don't want local newspapers to be carriers. But in essence, if it's a carrier of good stuff, then it is something that is complementing your publication.
Call it value added.
Value add, value add.
Sorry.
Okay, I just want to check, if you say you set up the student publication before COVID.
Yeah,
Just before
2018, yeah.
COVID. So how was the impact of COVID? Because I also set up a publication in Dundee, and within a few months I had to stop because of COVID. So what was the impact of COVID for your publication?
Yeah, I mean, I think with the rest of
And
us,
how
yeah.
is it doing now?
Yeah.
Because COVID is obviously not just.
Yeah. So what we decided to do recently, decided to stop printing. We said, let's do e-editions, let's test that space. And that's during that time as well. And we were fortunate to be also one of the beneficiaries of a relief fund that was awarded through MDDA. They gave us a little bit of a olive leaf to say, not olive leaf, but like a lifeline to say, you can print. So we took, I think it was 25,000 Rand, and then we printed pretty much what was our last kind of edition. And but right now we are looking at it, we are thinking, how are we going to do this? How are we going to invest? So that's why we're here, to find out solutions. And if
then you think that paper that you have, the white paper, is it the cost? I mean, would you not be thinking of changing and using newsprint?
Yeah, that's the thing. We would not go to newsprint. We applied a lot of thinking behind why we chose this format and also why we made it white. It's a hybrid between a magazine and a newspaper. So I think for us, yeah, it's Constat paper. I think it's about 80 GSM. Yeah, so we decided to look, let's not move away from what we're doing. There are other publications that universities have started up, like Perde Bay, and I think that's in Potchefstroom as an example. They print in newsprint, but it's by the students for the campus. So they are kind of like capitalized and helped with fundraising, etc. We are completely independent for this publication. But for Do News, it's print. It's a newsprint, yeah.
Chris, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, really.
No, we gotta move on to doing.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thanks very much.
Oh, yes, I think it's gonna be- No, that's fine.
Mike here. Okay. Do you mind taking this for during the session? I don't know if you are. Oh, okay. That's fine. Audible? Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Tunsan Nwesi. I'm the publisher, the owner of Tavela newspaper. Can you move on to the third slide? Yes, Tavela newspaper is a stronger publication, which we started in December 2008 as a monthly publication. I mean, the reason I've started this publication, I remember when I was still at school at Boston, there was this lecturer, Jenna Kay. She came with the ABC, the Audited Bureau of Circulation list, and show us, look, these are the publications that were having in the country. But that time there was no vendor newspaper, there was no Tsonga newspaper, there was no PD newspaper. So just encouraging us that no, there's no use for you to go and look for a job. I mean, you just complete and then somehow try to start your own newspapers, try to start your own business. I think by that time, quite a number of my friends, some of them, they were doing graphic design, they started their own company doing the graphic design. And I decided to start my own newspaper. So when we started as a monthly publication, It was, I mean, 18, it was 8 to 16 pages. I mean, in letter. We were circulating in Limpopo, the eastern part of Limpopo, where most, I mean, Tsonga people, I mean, are staying. This, I mean, the Tavela, it means fountain in Xitsonga. So, and Tavela, I mean, to make, I mean, a huge impact. I mean, the reason I said that will make the huge impact, I mean, Department of Education, I mean, let's say the National Department of Education in Limpopo, I mean, in South Africa, when they set the exam and when they use something, when they want something in Xitsonga, they are using, I mean, a Tavela newspaper as a reference, I mean, to teach students how to write, I mean, an article, how to read, I mean, and so forth. So it's assumed that, I mean, in fact, it's estimated that, I mean, one publication is read by 2 to 3 people. And also, we are the member of, because we don't want to be like, I mean, operating at, I mean, at my own small corner. So we make sure that, I mean, I'm affiliated with all this organization, the professional organization that were even in the country, your South African National Leaders Forum, your Press Council, your Audit Bureau of Circulation. Of course, I mean, the AIP, of which I'm the board member of it. Because if I don't mention that, I mean, the chairperson is going to record me now. So these are the, I think it's you, Billy, were asking, or it's Andy was saying, how many languages are we having in South Africa? So I think this one is the old one. It's old one, because like now we've got the, is it the, what is the sign language? Yes, they just passed the bill of that. I mean, you are even, so this is according to the statistics, the Afrikaans, English, and then you can see Xitsonga there at the bottom.
Can you just very quickly, what is the bilingual ratio, like people who speak 2 or more languages fluently?
It's difficult to because like myself, I can speak isiZulu a bit, I can speak Spedi, and then yeah. So this is the a map of our distribution. I come from this Malamlele. It's a township, but I'm operating from Polokwane. Polokwane is the capital city of my province that I'm coming from. So the reason I've decided to locate my office in Polokwane, Malamlele is a very small town. I mean, there's no economic activity, so I was going to be struggling to get business. So when I'm in Polokwane, it's easy for me to go to government, but also like all these places that we are seeing. I mean, wherever, I mean the freelancers who are working there, and also, in fact, it's a freelancers, although they do a little bit of marketing, because some people, they call me and say, okay, we want to advertise, so I just send them, oh, there's this person, please just go to them, give them a form, and then they fill up, and then, yeah. So we have quite a number of partnership, because this new publication, I'm told that, I mean, is the only Xitsonga newspapers that were even, I mean, the country. So we've just partnered with, in fact, we've signed the memorandum of understanding with the University of Pretoria, although we have not yet, I mean, started to work on this, because it's a long-term project. I mean, it's one project that's going to help to assist us to be, I mean, sustainable, to continue, I mean, publishing. We also signed, I mean, the trade of exchange with Munganalone FM. Is a public radio station. It's owned by the SABC. So we have given them half page, and then they've given us it was four slot, I mean, a day. So half page is just interview the presenter or the program, and then the player, I mean, our slot, and this rate of exchange, I mean, it has given us more exposure than before. Hence, I mean, you see that like now we've also signed the MOU again with the South Africa Agency of Science and Technology. So this guy, I mean, before they were working with the mainstream media, and they were paying a lot of money, serious money. So, but they decided that, I mean, they're not getting, I mean, what they wanted, and then they came to us as a community media, I mean, across the country. So I think, Andele, you got one of them. Yes. So we say, okay, give us the intent. Don't give us the money, pay them. I think they're paying them, is it 4.5 or, yeah, 4.5. So what we are doing with this MOU, the journalists, they go to the villages. You know, before, I mean, this technology medicine, I mean, when they were even flu, they were going to take this tree, mix this tree and tree, and then so they go and write about that story. Is okay. I mean, if you are even a flu, I mean, you can use this and this, I mean, traditional, I mean, medication. Yeah. Yeah. Yesterday, I mean, we're talking about this journalism versus the money. So I still stand with my words. Money comes first, but I mean, this thing, you have to balance it. And you can say, Billy, that I mean, we were balancing it. I mean, the journalism part of it, because I don't want to fool myself. Say journalism, this and this and this, while I'm still failing to like, I can't pay fees for my kids. I mean, it's very painful. I mean,
I want to clarify my statement. When I said I think journalism is a public service first and not a business, I'm thinking about, the First Amendment in the US says freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly. Is a church a business? They need money. They need money to build the church, to turn on the lights, to operate, to pay the clergy. Is that a business or a community service? So I'm not dismissing the need for money.
I don't know whether if you can able to zoom in. I just only want to zoom this. Yeah. No, go up. No, this one. Yeah, this one. Go up. Up. Yeah, up. Yeah. No, it's fine. Yeah. So this award, I mean, was given by SADC for our role in trying to end, I mean, abuse of women and the gender violence. Because I mean, it's very bad. I mean, what's happening, I mean, in the villages, and the mainstream media, I mean, they don't really care about, I mean, about that thing. In fact, even if they care, they don't have, I mean, journalists to go there. They don't even distribute that. So this is one of the things that will make sure that, I mean, as a community newspaper, we cover this type of the stories. I mean, when these people came, in fact, they've done their own research. Like, I mean, they were collecting, I mean, my newspaper without knowing. Okay, that studying my newspaper, I will publish the balancing of stories, I mean, women and this and this and this. And then they've come to conclusion like, no, this newspaper, it's also deserve this. And also this one, yeah, the South Africa Football Association, I mean, in the district that, I mean, it was distributed. Again, I mean, the mainstream media, they don't cover that type of a league. I mean, it's we us, I mean, taking advantage of it, cover it, and then like, also I didn't feel anything from, they just come to say, no, you must come, and then we were even the award. And I thought, okay, they want me to cover the story. To my surprise, they say, no, we awarding Tawela newspaper for this and this and this and then and this. So you can see, I'm trying to balance this thing to make sure that
Is this football league, is it a semi-pro, pro, youth league? Like,
It's a national.
oh, it's national. Is it pro or semi-pro?
Yeah, semi-pro.
Semi-pro.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Let's go to the next slide. Oh, okay. So this one, it was last year, just after the COVID. I think we were honored, I mean, among the media personnel, including the one from national broadcaster, the SABC. They were there. All the mainstream newspapers. I mean, they were there. So I think I was one of community person who were there, was honored in this particular award. Yeah, once come to we've got our policy is simple because like now, I mean, as I say, I mean, we're having the intern. I mean, when the interns come, they're fresh from school. I mean, I started in 2008. I mean, so like now, I think I'm running short of ideas here and there. But when the intern come and say, look at the publication and look this and say, no, we think we can change this and that and that and that and that. So we've got that I mean policy to allow them to advise. I think how many minutes I'm still?
You've got 7 minutes.
Plenty
of time.
Okay, let me run because I just want to put in those spot because this one yesterday it's everybody's problem anyway of advertising. I think even my colleague that are still going to present tomorrow. This is the main problem. So I just want us to at least have this 7 minutes. Now, let us use it to discuss what's the best way to deal with the issues of advertising. Because what we have done, I mean, we Mahmoud, is it 2020? We went to Parliament Portfolio Committee, and then in 2018, 17 again, we went to Parliament. The main promises that they're going to give. So as a association, because we decided we have to take this thing upon ourselves. We cannot rely on this government or this advertising agency. So what we have done now, or what we are busy on it, we want to start our own advertising agency, what we call it a national cooperative, which is, I mean, the chairperson, she's the leader on it. And one thing that I've discovered, I mean, from Jan up until March, we managed to get 3 campaigns at our own, without, I mean, the middlemen. So I think if we can have, I mean, a little bit of discussion, is it, I mean, a right way what we're doing now to start to think at our own? Because another thing that we want to do.
Say most of the states in the United States have their own press associations. Now some are together, like the New England Press Association covers Maine, Connecticut, right? But most have their own. Ohio has its own, Pennsylvania has its own, et cetera. And most of those do have an ad sharing system so that members can access information about advertising. They can do some collective purchasing and things like that. They've been moderately successful. Some have been more successful than others. Ohio does have one. And the director of the Ohio News Media Association, Monica Newport, is a panelist in week 3. And she's going to be here in person.
Oh.
So I can ask her to talk a little bit about that as well while she's here. Okay, but that kind of collective thing can be effective. One of the problems they have at the organizational level is many of their members are direct competitors. And so you have this issue of 2 members of the organization who compete in the same market, not wanting to share any information. And certainly, so there's been some of those issues, but it can be helpful.
Okay.
Yeah.
So another thing that we see is a major stumbling block. It's a big problem. Is the printing.
Now, one thing the organizations could do more of, and we talked about this yesterday, is identifying those cooperative advertising dollars and trying to figure out a way to get those into the state, right? And so into the membership. So, you know, for example, what's a national brand of like farm equipment or lawn equipment in South Africa? Like John Deere, perfect. John Deere's got billions of dollars in advertising. I'm sure they have co-op dollars available for the South African market, okay? So AIP could, for example, leverage John Deere to say, hey, how much co-op funding do you have available to dealers in our memberships? And then help the individual members tap into that, to go to their local retailers and say, hey, John Deere dealer in Polokwane, you know, you can get this money from John Deere to advertise in this paper, this paper, this paper, this paper, right? So the only way that works, is if you kind of drop the competition among each other and think about, you know, the rising tide raises all ships type thing. If we each get an equal share or a proportional share and we're happy with our share, we're all benefiting. But if it becomes, no, I want that and you can't have it, then that whole system breaks down. But there are billions of dollars in cooperative advertising that goes unspent every year.
I think we've never looked at it that way. We always approach an entity like John Deere, as you are saying. We would approach them individually for ads, and we would never say to them, your co-op advertising, as you are saying, because it's not something which we are familiar with.
I mean, I know that organizations like AIP have different members who are active at different levels, and some are more into cooperation than others, et cetera, et cetera. But in an ideal world, if every member of the AIP was on board for collective work, that we all work together, right? You have 200 plus newsrooms. You have the largest journalism workforce in South Africa.
Yes.
You could tackle national issues and not just tough issues, but simple issues. You could have like, we're all going to coordinate and cover this particular event, this national holiday. We're going to get together and tap into national advertisers to do localized advertising. So the AIP kind of becomes the broker for the big deal, and everybody gets their little piece of the deal.
Which is what I'm trying to.
Yeah.
That my time is up, can give to me.
Yeah, except I used most of it.
No, for a question, just go.
Yes, Linda.
I'm just saying that it's a great idea, but I think currently we are trying to do it at an online level. And I know that it's going to sound weird that as an online publisher, I'm going to say though that I find advertising for online it just doesn't work. And I think that if we push the co-op, this idea, it should be targeted more at the print level where you can clearly say you will appear at X number of publications. This is the deal, and publishers know that this is the percentage. Clicks don't work. I don't care how you look at it. If you're not Google and Facebook, clicks don't work.
I guess what I was getting at.
No.
Sandili,
Please.
Sandili, what I was getting at is that the AIP members, again, this is Pollyannish, ideal, everybody gets along, there's no bad actors or anything. Of course, so, you know, it's like everybody's in it together. This amount of revenue comes to the AIP membership and is distributed proportionally to all members. So even though your publication can't sell a particular ad because of the nature of your publication, the organization gets this big pot of money to distribute personally, and you get your little cut.
Yeah.
By the same token, there's things that online only publications can leverage very heavily that's not going to benefit print. And then, you know, you'll get your share and everybody else gets their share. So it's kind of like a farmers cooperative. I keep coming back to farming because the parallels between agriculture and the community journalism are unmistakable on an economic level. Yeah. Well, even on a cultural level, the hours suck, right? It's seasonal, feast or famine, you know, you never know what is going to happen. So there's all kinds of cultural parallels as well. But if you have a group of small independent dairy farmers who come together to form a milk processing plant. So we have the cows, we have the milk, but we don't have the means to convert the milk into bottled milk, value-added products like cheese, butter, ice cream, and things like that. If we all pull our resources and we create one central dairy plant and all of the farmers benefit. And then the payout is, you've got 30 cows, you get 30 cows worth of the profits. You've got 100 cows, you get 100 cows worth of the profits. So it's distributed proportional. The amount you put in corresponds to the amount you get out. You could do that collectively with
So
advertising.
to use your analogy, we could say that cows could represent your print order.
Exactly.
And if your print order is a higher one, you have a proportional higher revenue from the dish. Is that what you mean?
So it's a cooperative model rather than a membership model.
It's something we have discussed at Western Cape level because we've had several meetings with a co-op that we tried to launch in the Western Cape. That seems to be the issue that you're raising. That seems to be one logistical barrier that we haven't crossed yet. But I don't think it's something that's insurmountable. It can be resolved. But the idea of having a national co-op with national brands. So you're talking about Macro and Games and Pick and Pay, ShopRite. These are brands that would be interested if we provide them with a compelling presentation, a compelling motive to support advertising at that level. But I think the big barrier for us would be the agencies. They would oppose this.
I'll give you a cultural example again from the agriculture side. In my culture, we have these things that are called barn raisings, okay? And so the idea is somebody bought a new piece of land, they need to build a new barn for the farm, or a barn burnt down and they need to rebuild it, right? The whole community comes together. You buy the materials, so you have the materials and everything set out, the whole community comes together and the barn goes from materials to a standing barn in one day. Because many hands make small work of big tasks. So if the collective effort, that gives you the numbers to leverage the thing. When it comes to advertising, that gives you the numbers that big advertisers are like, oh, we're not interested in 1, 2, 3 newspapers. We can get into 200 newspapers that span the entire country. We can talk. That's a deal that we can talk to. And then you figure out what is an equitable way to distribute the revenue.
And I don't think there's anything stopping AIP connection from the AIP agents. Absolutely. I mean, honestly.
There's been a discussion that's been had for a long time.
For years.
The example of Mother Tongue Media, which is working with AIP. I don't know if you know the example, but it's an individual has set up an ad agency, which is his personal business. But what he's doing is he's partnering with AIP publications, digital publications that are publishing in African languages. And he inserts code on all of their websites. He goes to national advertisers and says, I will sell advertising. I will sell you advertising that will go out through 10 different South African languages via all of these websites. So it's all done digitally and automated. So, and it's quite painless. I mean, who here is actually working with?
I'm a member, and that's
Yes,
why,
and it's working for you.
There's nothing.
Okay.
that's why I'm saying that because you as mother tongue media,
Yeah.
you get revenue based on the
Based
fact
on
that
the-
it's going on X number of, but I
Yes.
get revenue only based on the clicks.
That's right.
And I am niche and I'm new. And, you know,
Yeah.
I don't really have a big marketing budget. So, you know, but my content is really good. And the point is whether from my website, you've got 10 clicks or you've got 100 from Bali, as a brand, you have been visible in X number of publications. So Mother Tongue Media is a Google model, which
Yes.
just doesn't work for us.
It is a clicks model, absolutely. Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, just throw something out there. Just haven't thought it out, haven't thought it through. There's a concept called stock fair language. So we put money together, then it's your turn to get money this month, it's your turn to get money next month. But everyone is putting money together. I'm just throwing it out there. I haven't thought this out. What if that model could look like that? And it's an African concept. What if the actual ad revenue that's coming through, let's say from Mother Tongue Media, that month benefits one publisher, as an example, benefits the one publisher. Then the next month, it benefits the other publisher. Just as a concept, because remember, at the end of the day, you're not getting anything at all. And to get a lump sum like that once in a while is better than getting nothing at all. I'm just curious. Just as a concept. Because I mean, if you look at it from an African point of view, think about it this way.
Well, this is what happens in spite of the collective efforts is if you go into it with, let's say, okay, let's talk about how we can make this work, rather than throwing out, well, we tried that before and it didn't work. Well, that was 5 years ago. You know what we didn't have 5 years ago? Any concept of a global pandemic. Any concept of remote working as a dominant way for people to work, right? And so, you know, 1 year can change dramatically the entire landscape. And just because something didn't work before doesn't mean it was a bad idea. Maybe it was before its time. But also learning from getting back to things that did work in the past that were abandoned. It's like, maybe it's time to bring these old ideas back to the table. This community, Athens, is a thriving food industry. The land here is marginal for agriculture at best. You can't grow commodity crops here at any size. There are a handful of farms, they're all in the floodplain that can grow corn, maize, wheat, things like that, and compete on the market. They can't raise hogs, they can't sell on the big markets. They don't have the volume to compete. They can grow fresh vegetables, niche fruits, specialty items, okay, things like that. So we have this huge locavore, it's called locavore, you eat local, right? And the food is fresher, it's better quality, they're not using chemical inputs. So it's either certified organic or it could be certified organic if they want to go through the process and things like that. This is state of the art 1929. I mean, this is Depression era agriculture from you know, the early 20th century that has been reinvented for the 21st century. And they're thriving. They built a community kitchen just up on Columbus Road. And so we have like Crumb's Bakery. They bake breads and delicious breads because they are delicious and things like that. They use that facility 2 or 3 times a week to bake their bread. And then they vacate, and then the next company comes in. Frog Ranch Salsa comes in to make their salsa. And then the next local company comes in. So they take turns in the co-op to produce their fruit stuff and get it out. These are all things that were started during the Great Depression in the United States. All ideas. And it was like, oh, maybe we can bring that back. And it's worked. So think about things that have worked in the past that you're like, I wish we could find a way to make that work. And you might be able to make it work.
I think that concept of the co-ops is something which we've been trying for years. But as you are saying, it's time to revive it in a different way. And right now we've got a pilot projects of about 5 campaigns, and these are moving. So it can't be done by the AIP. That is the problem, because we want to separate the organization from publishers. And that was clear. The ED explained, even our former ED explained that it has to be separated. AIP can't handle advertising, it can't handle this because it's a PBO. And it's not a
Right.
Can just endorse it.
Yeah, so that is why the issue of the national co-op is a critical one, which we are working on right now. And it has started already. It's just that it's at a small scale and we haven't finished the registration.
Well, or you know, the other option is instead of doing a national co-op, have regional co-ops. Okay, and then have the regional co-ops coordinated through a national co-op of co-ops.
That is our
The umbrella co-op. Okay.
That is exactly where we are going. So it's a matter of just finalizing.
Are there any
that.
questions for Dooney?
No, you said we must focus on
Oh.
advertising. This is why we're talking about this. No, check this out. I was going to say, let us give you a chance to fast track this issue of this national co-op, because really, I know, Mahmoud, we've been talking about opening an ad agency, and the AIP must be behind that ad agency. Seemingly, it's not working. Let's go for this one, a national co-op, and you must fast track it so that we can feel the benefits. Even Slim must feel the benefits while he's there in KwaZulu-Natal. Also, we must feel the benefit there. And you know, the regional co-ops, Mali, they are not working. Provincial co-ops are not working. So I think we need to do it, to centralize it, and it must come from top to bottom. They are not working at all. That's what I was going to say. You guys, you must fast track this thing, this issue of co-op.
And to add on this, Bill.
Okay. The thing about, now we have lots of co-ops in the United States covering just about everything.
Yes.
So from electrical service, to telephone service, to food delivery, to education, the whole thing. A top-down start fails. Because a co-op means people buy in. So it has to be grown from the bottom up. It really must be. Now, if we have a national goal, but you're going to start with maybe a very small number of members who are geographically scattered. But if you create this big model and try to impose it on others, most people are like, nope, I don't want part of that. Or this was created by other people telling me how I should and should not operate. I'm not interested in that. And the co-op is, again, it's like any community or any family. You're going to have tensions, dynamics. Some are going to contribute more than others. You're going to have some who coast or slack and things like that. But it's like if you start by saying, okay, who is really committed to making this work? That 5 people. There's 5 people that make everything happen because nothing else has ever worked with that small number of people. You'd say we have an aspiration to be a national group, but we will never be top down. We will always derive our power from the ground up. Always.
I've watched and been part similar to the distance from what talking about here. And one of the big problems is political interference. In South Africa, once someone has a good idea, some political party member wants to come steal it to make some money. So maybe if you have a constitution of a regionally based co-op that indicates the neutrality when it comes to these kind of things, and also we have other issues with diversity, where one group of people wants to dominate another and so on. So you have those two things that make it really difficult to say from a regional basis. So what you're saying, basically, I understand from the top down, you kind of move away from your little local issues and it becomes national. However, I understand also what you're saying also, but if you have some way in which we can introduce a constitution that is flat, that denies, the motif of political interference somehow, that is the basis for everyone to sign up into, then we can perhaps, maybe there's an opportunity to move away from some of the divisiveness that tends to take place in South African terms, particularly when you have regionalism. There's a lot of shenanigans take place. Yes. People think they can get away with it because they're in a little hall somewhere and no one's going to watch. And then there's domineering. There's a lot of dominant
most
politics.
Cooperatives, especially cooperatives that are more business oriented, they have some basic ground rules. It's like, this is the minimum contribution you have to make to maintain your membership. And if you don't abide by these basic conditions, then you will be removed from the co-op.
Yes, Bill, when I was saying it must be centralized, those are the issues that I was talking about in terms of constitution and other rules, membership fee. It must come from that. Because I
bristle against the term centralized. I know what you mean. Okay, it has to be a collective agreement.
Yes, because we are now having a situation. We are in Alfred Nzo in the Eastern Cape. There are other guys in East London and PE. They feel that they are the big boys. They get business, they don't give us here. They give each other there on that side, and we don't know about that. We will hear in the corners that Sandra has some leaflets for you guys, and we don't get that business. So that is why I'm saying regional co-ops are not working. We always fight. So it would be better for you guys to create all the policies up there, and then we can sit down and say, here is the affiliation fee, here is the membership fee, all those things, but it must come from.
Well, one thing about cooperatives is they generally are not built to last forever. They're built to last for a period of time, and then either they've done what they needed to do, and then they're done, they expire, or they're replaced by new cooperatives. So, the idea of let's create something that's permanent, that usually leads to folly when it comes to this kind of collective thing. Again, because cultures change, times change, and things like that. People come, people go. If it's a membership type thing where people can join, as long as they meet the criteria, they're there. But if they want to depart and go do their own thing, like the big boys, they want to strut around. But what the co-op does is it prevents, what the bullies generally do is they try to seed chaos because they benefit. If you all can't get along, they benefit, right? And so they will try to disrupt, they will try to break up the collective power. That's what bullies do, right? And so, but if you say, okay, well, the old system, the old partnerships are not working. That's been corrupted, it's run its course, it's moving on momentum, but it's not innovating. Let it go. remove from that, say we're gonna form a different co-op, one that's gonna address the needs that we have for the next 5 years, for 10 years. And then if we achieve everything in 10 years, then it just dissolves, okay? Or we form something new.
Sorry, just a comment, when you doing the company, service, I will comment, so that's our mindset right now. As Mediate Media as an example, is that I know that giving up equity of your company as an example is not something that any person would like to give. But if you are on the brink of actually closing down, I'm sure that you would actually be open to giving out at least 10% equity of your company. The reason behind I'm saying this is that there's a vested interest in whatever it is. I'm just throwing it out because I'll be still restructuring our company. So we are looking at it and saying, if you are willing to give us an equity of your company, at least 10%, not capital, we're not going to pay you money, but we're going to leverage on our services as an example. Layout and design, which you used to spend a lot of money in, 2,000 Rand for 8-pager, layout and design. We absorb that as part of our partnership. And also, if we now go out there and find advertising, go and pitch, we're pitching for all of us. But we've got a vested interest because whatever you get or whatever we get, whatever you get individually from MDDA is going to benefit our business because you will say you've got a budget for developing a news website. Who are you going to use? You're going to use your partner, which is Mediate Media. You're not going to go use a guy around the corner that does website development. You're going to use your partner. And whatever strategies, like for example, rate card development is an example. We help you with that as well. Okay. Sorry, I'm pitching right now, but I'm thinking in this context.
Equity, though, and you're a great guy and you run a great company. What if you sell the company to somebody else who's not a great guy? Where does that equity go?
Well, this is a family business though.
I understand.
I understand that this is a family business. I mean, you can't really predict what's going to happen.
Exactly.
People buy from people.
Exactly.
They don't buy from companies. At the end of the day, if you trust me with a partnership, you're trusting me.
I understand. What happens if the family, something happens so that the family company is sold or dissolves? What happens to that equity? Just from a strict.
From a
This has nothing to do with you.
Oh, no, from a legal point of view.
Let's say that there's a completely different company on the other side of the country that's similar to yours trying to do the same thing. It's not you personally, it's somebody else. What assurances okay, so you're an organization and you give 10% equity to this company in exchange for services, and it's wonderful for 5-10 years. And then that company is sold, or heaven forbid, there's a tragedy where it can no longer sustain or anything. What happens to that equity? Does it revert back to the original? Or does that go to, like, if Caxton buys it out, does that 10% then go to Caxton?
Look, with any partnership, we have to discuss things.
Right.
You can't just work alone. So in essence, it will be something that's going to be, is it going to benefit the other partner as well?
I totally
You hear what I'm saying? So that's why I'm looking at it from that point of view.
I'm just asking from a strictly legal, practical standpoint, what happens to the equity if something happens with the main company?
Maybe we suggesting that you make that provision.
Yeah.
In your
No, I'm not making any suggestions. This is just a journalistic question. I'm just curious about how that works. That's all. It's not, no judgment. I have no
That would be
judgment.
nice actually, that in a provision in case something happens. Yeah, it's a value add as well.
It's critical.
Yeah, it's critical.
There's a clause, for example,
Remember when
suddenly
we
you pass
discussed-
away
Yeah.
and your wife decides, I can't deal with this anymore.
Yeah.
She's gonna sell. I've worked for 31 years. I'm not gonna give some stranger 10%, and I don't know what he's going to give back to me.
I did some legal advisory on that one. I haven't got that far. That's why we're restructuring, but I think that the concept in itself is a starter. It's a conversation to flip the script a little bit. And I think even doing away from the concept of the word, it sounds like a swear word. Co-op sounds like a swear word. Maybe change the word as well.
In this country, it sounds like you're a communist.
Yeah, like, it's a swear word in itself. Because the thing is, I think that's the reason why I'm so excited to be here as well, is that when we go back to South Africa, we come back with different lingo. We change our, what do you call it in English? A lingo, there's a word, there's a
Jargon?
no, there's a very fancy word, a lingo whatever. Lingo franca. We change our lingo franca, all right? And we go back there with new ideas and flipping the script a little bit in the sense that we say, guys, what about, have you thought of this? Maybe it might not be equity. Maybe it might be a person that is starting something like this and say, what is Mediate Media going to benefit from this? Is it 15% commission? Because I'm amongst you as well.
But also just throwing it out as a thought experiment. There's another way of doing it, and that is that you set up a company that the other companies, the sort of subsidiary, or not the other companies take shares in. So instead of the central company taking shares in the others, you have a sort of cooperative ownership of an umbrella company.
But you see, there's a thing called Ndomnyama doesn't like to see another one go up. I'm sorry, I have to say it out loud. It's in general. What it means is that another black person doesn't like to see another black person get up.
Well, it's the tall
it's a
puppy
concept.
syndrome. That's
Tall
that
puppy,
idea.
yeah.
Crab syndrome. The Native Americans call it the crab syndrome. It's like, you know, the crabs in a bucket.
Yeah.
You don't have to put a lid on the bucket because the crabs keep dragging each other down. They even have a joke about it. It's like, what do you think of that person? It's not my crab, not my bucket. Brainstorming exercises are already useful.
But it's
Something will go somewhere.
I think, guys, what this shows is that there's key discussions that need to be held, not in the US, but back home about the structuring and the operations of the AIP and the kind of, all of these things need to be looked at. It's great that we're having these open conversations now and all the ideas that's coming through, but we need some real conversation happening back home.
Yeah, I'm not trying to defend the AIP, but I don't think it's the AIP's responsibility to organize us. We are there as publishers in provinces. Limpopo has got about 5 publishers and they are together. They get campaigns together.
And in fact, we're even using one
crab
office.
mentality you're talking about doesn't it doesn't because it's much. I'm not saying we are immature in provinces where this is happening, but that province is excellent. We had KZN was one of the top provinces at one time, but then this mentality came, like we are saying, people were now trying to fight the system. No, this one is doing that. So the problem is mainly because of people. And if we can sort out our mindset, we will be operating like Limpopo. Because Limpopo's co-op is now the top co-op. Like we saw, Doni's publication has got campaigns, it's got ads, and those ads, Doni, if I'm not mistaken, are right through in all the other publications that you.
When I was there, and I think it was 2013, I met with the Limpopo Publishers Association, Anton organized.
Okay.
It was we had a nice discussion. Really nice discussion. There was about 20 people there. It's really nice.
Yeah, so
Maybe 5 comfort.
5.
Are you 5, my friend?
5.
I'm translating what you said. I'm just translating what you said.
You are not going to have a problem once like 5. You are only few, but the moment you grow the number more than 10, then that's where the problem comes.
Well, that gets back to what Tess said. You need to have some ground rules and bylaws and stuff. If you agree to those, then you can be in a co-op. In South Africa, I don't know, so AIP has its mission, and there's things that it can't do under its charter, et cetera, et cetera. But it's not uncommon for state press associations in the United States to have, they have another legal entity, but they're like that, right? So like the Ohio News Publishers Association has another organization that's attached to it. It's called the Ohio Coalition for Open Government. So, and the ONMA is a member, and it's the administrating member. So it's like they administer all the activities, but it's a collection of specific news media. The Ohio Broadcasters Association is a member, several universities are a member, and this is an organization that advocates for the sunshine laws we talked about, improving access to public records, improving access to public documents, transparency of government, things like that. It's related to the primary mission of the News Media Association, but it's separate. The Ohio News Media Association has an attorney on retainer for members of the news organization who have to deal with these issues. That attorney is also the solicitor for the OCOG because there's so much crossover. So you can have a way in which you have legal separations for policy, tax issues, things like that. But essentially the missions are aligned.
I'm thinking.
And we do that, like Ohio University is a public university, right? But we got a lot of money donated to us for all kinds of causes and things like that. We're a public university. we can't really accept donations and things like that because we're funded by the taxpayers. So our university and every other public university across the country has created a foundation. So the Ohio University Foundation is where that money comes in, they invest it. Right now, we have an amazing finance officer for that foundation. Foundation's doing really well.
And just one point, and that is why I think at one stage, there was the idea of setting up an investment company under
right.
the AIP.
Right.
So that can work, because that can then assist these issues of us accessing funds. But it's
All right, this is a great conversation and we'll continue it. I mean, we only have Andy for the rest of the afternoon, so we want to make sure.
Website, so they just naturally think, well, you're in business.
Testing.
So what we did was we with several other nonprofits. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm good to go now. We created what was called the Virginia Local News Summit, which was held in the state capital of Virginia about 3 weeks ago. We brought together about 60 or 70 people in the state. They were people from foundations, people who run nonprofits, startups. We had experts from around the country come in, and we basically spent 2 days saying, we got a problem. We all know we have a problem. We're struggling to survive. And it was very much like this discussion here. It just ended up with people saying, well, we're trying this, or we're trying this, or that won't work, and all that. And I'm actually very proud of this because we're a little tiny nonprofit, but we feel because we have been successful, we feel we have a bigger role to play in instigating this. One of the things that we did to contribute was we hired a really terrific freelance reporter who has worked for us before. He used to be the deputy bureau chief of the Associated Press in Washington. And we said to him, do a 3-part series of legitimate reporting on the threats to local news in Virginia. And he did a great job with that. And then we got newspapers and news, yeah, if you can, and news organizations throughout Virginia to run that story. So basically, going back to where I started, most people don't realize there's a problem. Suddenly we had people in communities saying, oh my gosh, I had no idea that my newspaper is about to go under. So that's part of our process, and it's gotten a lot of pickup. So,
Is there anything else on the site you want me to look at?
no, not really, unless you go to let me go up to the top here. Do the survey, and remember I said we're a big believer in transparency. Everything about that survey that we talked about. If you were starting from scratch and you wanted to see how to do a survey, everything is there. An overview of our findings, the responses, the actual responses we got, the survey methodology, which goes into great detail, just a summary of it, the full report. If you want to see the absolute full report, everything is there. So going to your question about can commercial enterprises, how do you monetize this? Anybody who wants to take that information can do it. We're only too happy to have them do it. So anyhow, I think the latter part, what we were going to discuss here is ways to engage your audience. And, this is sort of maybe a good, just a discussion we can have here, but I thought what might be valuable is I just quickly wrote down 12 no-cost ideas of how either we communicate with our audience or people that I know are doing this in some way. So you can pick and choose, and then I'm very interested in how you communicate. Again, this is the starting point is we feel, any news organization feels this way, that you have to develop a bond with your with your audience. And for us, we start with how we talk about it. We never refer to ourselves as part of the media. That's too amorphous for people. Media has bad connotations, but when you say we are your trusted local source of information, then they start to get it. And we make a big deal when we've occasionally done little ads in the paper about some of our journalists. We make a point of saying these freelancers that are doing these stories that you see appear in the local paper, they live right here with you, you know? That's a very important thing to do. There's an interesting group if you really want to get into this. I'm sure Bill is aware of this, but the University of Missouri, Reynolds Journalism Institute, has a program called the Trusting News Program. And actually, do you know Lynn Walsh? Lynn is a graduate of Ohio University. She is the co-director of this. They offer a steady stream of advice to news organizations trying to build trust with their audience. This includes a lot of TV stations. So I'm always intrigued when I go around the country and I'm looking at local news TV ads, how they, they're sort of constantly talking about their reporters and everything. It's remarkable the number of those ads where you will have a TV reporter on saying, I'm so-and-so, I grew up here, or I live in the community, I've lived here. That is very conscious. That's, what people hate about the media is when you sort of parachute in and try to understand a community. That doesn't work so much. So I would recommend looking at that. Okay, so no cost ideas. I'll just go through these very quickly. Any one of these you can do, and you probably do half of them, so I may not be telling you much, but I'm intrigued by one that our little paper does that we kind of participate in. They do something once a month, and they call it Fourth Estate Friday. Fourth Estate being us, the press, all right? They pick a specific Friday. I think it's the first Friday of every month. They advertise it in the paper, and all they do is they say, okay, this month, Fourth Estate Friday is at this little cafe. It's at 10 o'clock on a Monday morning or something like that. The editor and the staff come in. I try to show up just because we are sort of the nonprofit that helps them with news. And anybody in the community can show up and just talk about the news. And it is so simple and it is so beneficial. People come in with story ideas. People come in not so much with complaints, but how did you do that story? Or you did that story and why didn't you do that? It doesn't cost you a penny. All it costs is these people who show up, they go to the counter, they get a cup of coffee, go into a little room or a part of the cafe, and they just sit there and talk. One of the values I've found in this is that the audience, and typically the audience is no more than a dozen people show up. Sometimes you get a few more, but they actually, in many cases, it's the first time they've ever interacted with a journalist. People think, understandably, we are weird people, and let's face it, we are. We're different than most people, but they have this preconceived notion of journalists as being evil people or with an agenda, or they're out to screw people or whatever. When they actually learn that we took great care in a story, or that we're thoughtful about it, or we have sensitivities to people in our audience, that's a big deal to them. So that's the first no cost thing you can do. A second thing that has been done it used to be done at newspapers in the chain of newspapers that I work for. Are you familiar with Tupperware parties? You know that in South Africa? Yeah. Okay, all right. The equivalent of that is neighborhood coffees with the editor. And I've always been intrigued by this because you basically get somebody in a community, in a neighborhood, to invite maybe 15 or 20 of their friends to come to your house, and the editor of the local paper or the news outlet is there. It is a very low-tech, retail-oriented way of having a casual conversation with people, and you would be surprised how fast the word spreads that, hey, the editor, she was actually okay. She's a good person. She's thoughtful. Here's what they do. Again, that it takes time to do this, but I'm sure in any of your communities, you could find 10 people that would be willing to do that. A third thing is, I mentioned that our Foothills Forum with the newspaper, we started a daily text service. And this is done by the Report for America reporter that we pay 40% of her salary. And it's very simple. Every day she puts out a text and it basically says, here's an upcoming event, or there was a car crash here, or here's a meeting, or something like that. Increasingly, we are using that to engage the audience, to solicit their ideas or their questions. So recently we went through a whole round, as every community does, on the county budget, all right? One of the questions is, what don't you know about the proposed county budget, all right? We assume we know what, we've reported stories on this. We think we know what people don't know. We don't really know what they don't know. Lots of times there are obvious questions that we miss. Another one is, what's the number one concern about crime in your part of the county, all right? You could go on every day posing questions, and it's just a very simple reporting tool that you use, but I think it has another purpose. It's telling people in the community, we're actually asking you. We're not making an assumption. The news organization is, we're asking you to tell us what you think. A fourth thing that we have tried unsuccessfully that we are going to try and do differently. I mentioned we are called Foothills Forum. We had this idea, we'll report the stories and we'll have a forum and you come and we'll talk about the story. We found that doesn't really work, partly because the people that show up with that are the people that either have been quoted in the stories or whatever. But we're thinking of trying it differently with maybe doing it on a quarterly basis and calling it the Foothills Forum, and picking a topic and having people come in, and maybe you have an expert, or maybe you have a panel of citizens who are involved in this. It could be everything from, what's the future of our schools? We live in a rural area. The population of the schools is declining because it's an expensive area. You don't have as many young couples with family members or with kids coming in there. There's a real question about whether there will be a future for the local schools. Let me tell you, schools in a community are everything. They bring the community together, from community sports to parent teaching organizations and all that stuff. If you lose that, you've lost not only that, but you've lost kind of the galvanizing history of your community. That's a big deal. So to have actually a forum where you discuss this and put those issues out there, maybe bring in an outside expert, we think that is a good thing. We want to do it on affordable housing. I'm interested, we were talking earlier about news literacy. I think that would be a tremendous topic to have a forum about, because statistically you could show across America, this is a huge societal issue we have, and it affects our children here. So topics like that have to be well chosen. I don't think it would cost a thing. You could do it at your local library, you could do it at the high school or whatever, and just put an ad in the paper and invite people.
Is that, are you planning to use the Kettering model for that? Public issues forum model that Kettering came up with?
I never thought about that, but that's probably a good idea.
I mean, the Kettering Foundation started this during the civic journalism, and it was a way for news media to do exactly this, to identify issues in the community that were divisive but necessary to resolve at the community level. And so the newspaper would be the primary organizer of, they call them public issues forums. And they have a whole framework, and it's available free online. So framework about ways to organize it, like you say, find a public space where everybody can get together. Identify thought leaders across the spectrum, those who are for, those who are against, those who are sort of for, those who are sort of against, those who are in the middle, and invite them to be kind of like the thought projectors of their position, right? And the newspaper could run them as op-eds together or a special section. I did a number of these when I was an opinion page editor.
Live stream them if you want to.
One of the issues we tackled was the local school district wanted to add the term sexual orientation to the school's non-discrimination policy. This was in the mid-90s. This was a major upheaval. By the end of it, there was so much goodwill and so much common ground that it was like, of course we're going to have that. Because just getting people of different viewpoints together, we were the conduit for that. And we did not monetize it. We intentionally did not monetize it in any way. We were very careful not to accept any donations, any dollars. The newspaper paid for all of that stuff. Now, we used free spaces and stuff, so it wasn't very expensive, right? What we were doing is we were basically giving goodwill to the community in exchange for them trusting us and viewing the newspaper as not just a source of information, but a community.
So if you were doing it today,
Mhm.
many years later, how would you craft this so that it doesn't get hijacked by ideologues who want to go in and just start screaming about
This
stuff?
is the idea. You get the ideologues in from the very beginning. You invite, it doesn't get hijacked by them.
Mhm.
You put them at the table, front and
Mhm.
center.
Okay.
They're on the stage,
All right.
but they're on the stage with others
Mhm.
who have different points of view. And so now it's like you have to behave like a grown-up. You
Mhm.
can't just be somebody who's screaming from the crowd. You are now.
So you put them up on top, not in the audience then. Okay, very smart, very smart.
Like one of the people we had was a very, very, very right-wing Christian, anti-gay. He would write op-eds for the newspaper all the time. I would publish them. Then I'd get hate mail saying, "Why did you publish that?" Et cetera, et cetera. I was like, "Well, got you to write," you know.
Right.
And so he was one of the people I identified to write, you know, why this shouldn't happen type thing. By the end of it, he actually changed his mind. He's like, "Oh, I get it. That's not something that we would do in our organization, but I don't want to." He said that the opposition to adding this language is actually unchristian. Now that I've talked to other people about it.
Wow.
It was pretty remarkable. Now,
That
he
doesn't
still
happen.
felt like he lost my soul.
Uh-huh.
So he did give me a Bible that he had monogrammed with my name, which was a very nice gift.
Oh, it's thoughtful.
Anyway.
Yeah, so, okay, good ideas, good ideas. Okay, number 5. I'm intrigued by something that's being started, the idea of what are called documenters. Here in Ohio, there's a new big startup called, was it Cleveland Signal? Okay. This is a nonprofit. So up in the northern part of the state, all the newspapers are just, you know, they're barely functioning anymore. So they've gotten a lot of money to start a nonprofit called Cleveland Signal, right?
And Columbus Signal.
And Columbus Signal. So they're going to do it in different places. And one of the things that they've also gotten grant money for from the American Journalism Project is to train, their goal is 600 what they call documenters. These are people that are not journalists, but they will be trained in the basics to go to the school board meeting, the city council meeting, whatever, and document what went on. It may just be rudimentary. They proposed a 6% tax increase in something like this, and apparently this gets published. Okay, I'm interested in the concept of documenting. And at this summit we had in Richmond, Virginia, some people said, you know, what we need to use Documenter for is in our communities to go door to door and ask people, what is it you are not learning about? This is particularly important, in my opinion, in underserved communities that never get paid attention to. And as the discussion unfolded, people said, you know, we could get volunteers in our community to do that. These are not really people that really need much basic training in journalism at all. They're not doing news stories. They're doing sort of an informational survey of what people say they need information on. I can imagine one of the things in underserved communities is food insecurity. Where do we get information about where we can get food assistance or any number of things like that? I'm intrigued by that idea. And as I look at our rural community, I would think you could even get students to be involved in this, to go door to door in what we call the hollows. These are the remote areas where there's a house every quarter mile or something like that. And just sit down with people and say, what are the things you don't know that a news organization could or should be telling you? Again, I don't think it would cost much, but that's something that we're sort of going to play around with.
Thursday, Milo Miller from the budget is coming down.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, okay.
And they've been doing the documentary thing for 100 years.
And they're good, and they have a
national funds. Yeah.
You're going to be fascinated by this publication. I mean, this serves a very niche audience, I would say. Okay, number 6. We are about to start at, when we publish stories, having a single line at the bottom of the story that says simply, What more do you need to know? That may seem pretty simple, but people get at the end of a story and very often they reflect on, well, it didn't tell me this or that. We wouldn't know, and they're probably not inclined to tell us. But if we had a simple link, especially online, that just says, tell us what you didn't know, it allows us journalistically to more quickly respond to things that we may not have anticipated that they didn't know. But I think it sends another message. We're asking you, you are part of our news gathering infrastructure here. We're asking your opinion on that. We are this sort of goes back on that to the enhanced bylines thing too. I'm really intrigued by that. Any ways that we can continue the discussion going on how we do our work and how we follow up on stories. I'm talking about, or I'm interested in something that you're familiar with, Solutions Journalism Network. Do you know what solutions journalism is? Okay, this is a big term that has a lot of different meanings. Some people think it means that you write a story and you're telling people, here's what you ought to do. I think more commonly it is we're writing a story, but we're inviting people to come up with possible solutions or whatever. I'm intrigued by experimenting with that involving stories in the same way that when I ran a newsroom, I had a rule, which is when I would hire people, I would tell them that one of the things that will get you in trouble with me is when you don't tell me about something that's going wrong in our operation. But there was a caveat to that. I want you to tell me what's wrong or what we can improve, but you have to come in with a possible solution. So I'd like to come up with some way that this can be done journalistically, that when people criticize public policy things or criticize even what the news organization is doing, that they are encouraged to say, here is a possible solution. I think that would be fun to play around with.
And just so you know, Richland Source, which is where Shirley and Chris are going to spend next week, that's their business model. They're all about solutions.
Good. I wish I was South African and was part of this. This would be really beneficial for me. I mentioned earlier a very simple one, speaking to local groups, Rotary clubs, Lions clubs, library groups, whatever. Most people do not know how we do our jobs. They don't know the challenges we face. Just started with this. Most people think we're all thriving. We're doing great because you see the newspaper every week. Must be doing great. See ads in the paper. There is a very simple way to get your message out. And it's not necessarily promotional. It's getting these groups are always looking for speakers. And they have different people speak to them about the garden club or what's happening in the schools. There's no reason that a news organization leaders cannot go to these groups and just talk briefly about how we do our jobs and invite their questions and ask them always, what do you think we should be covering? Again, the idea is you're asking your community, we're here to serve you. That is very helpful. Number 9, very simple thing that people have been doing for years in news organizations, tip lines. Anonymous tips or just story ideas. If you look now on the Washington Post site, they have a whole section on how you can provide us with, give us a tip about people who are doing things that are wrong. They have it for encryption and all that. There are many, many ways you can do this to protect yourself. Yes.
So what do people see within the print? Then did you give them something or just for free?
They just do it for free. You don't pay them when they provide you a tip.
Sometimes you found that it's very sensitive information, and then let's say, it's I don't know what we call it, municipality or we say, it's working in the council as government, and then I'm exposing him, giving, okay, there's this and this. Sometimes I can even print some documents and give it to you. So obvious, that person somehow, something.
Are you suggesting they should be paid for doing
No, we don't pay sources.
that? No.
We don't pay sources. No.
I'm coming from a men.
You're-
In some cultures.
In some cultures, they probably do.
My information is worth something.
Yeah.
And it's like, the payment is not meant to favor one side coverage or anything. It's like, you're asking for my time and you're asking for my expertise. So why should I not be paid for that?
Yeah.
It's a story I'm happy not to run.
Exactly. Well, I'm just saying, not your culture, not our.
Yeah, it's not
but
our
there are
culture, but
Places where that is, if you don't pay, you don't get the information.
Yeah, that is actually, Bill is right on this. And I'll tell you a story on this. This goes back maybe 7 or 8 years ago. I was invited with the dean here. We went to Colombia, nation of Colombia, to talk to different people about news media. And my job was to talk to people who were campaign advisors on political campaigns. And what I was asked to do was, here's how you develop an ethical relationship with a journalist, even though you are promoting a candidate. And of course, I was thinking of how it works in America. There are certain ways we establish ground rules. I got about 5 minutes into this conversation, and one of these campaign managers said very politely, he said, this is really interesting, but he said, in our country, let me tell you 2 things. In our country, when a journalist wants to interview a candidate or a public official, the expectation is they will pay the public official or the person for an interview. Yeah. And then he went further and he said, and of course, in my country, we have journalists who go to these candidates and say, well, I've got this nasty story about it, but if you pay me a certain amount of money, I will publish it. So I was immediately out of my depth. I didn't know how to respond to that, because it's just, I'm not saying it never happens here, because we have had instances of what we call catch and kill and stuff like that. It happens a lot.
It was in 2014. And we had gone to interview this political leader. And this, but I don't even want to say the gender, because people will make out who it is. So we got to this person's house in the morning. I was weekend editor where I was working, and I had gone with a photographer and a political journalist. And this person offered us juice and water, and we did the interview. This is a house full of servants, because this was, Then the next thing, when we leave, the office was like 15 minutes away from the house. This politician offers us like a stack of 200 Rand notes. It probably was like, I don't know, it was more than 10,000. And this person said, oh, get yourselves breakfast, because, I couldn't make you guys breakfast. No, thank you. The office is around the country. My colleagues were mad at me, but they only realized this. I said, guys, but what are the chances? This is a house full of servants. We were there for more than an hour. If it was maybe 100 Rand notes, even that is not allowed. We would say the person was being sincere. But 10 grand or whatever.
How did you handle it?
No, I said no, thank you.
Is that the way you did? Is that the way you said it? You just said thank you, but no.
I said no, thank you, because it was ridiculously too huge. I said, but there's no breakfast for this kind of money. And of course, there are cameras in the house.
Yeah, I was about to say that's what I would worry about.
But even if there weren't, it was just a trap, though.
Yeah, sure.
And we have some news operations here that go the other direction, almost to absurdity. Like, you can't accept a cup of coffee from a source or anything else like that, which, and after 9/11, a lot of reporters in Detroit ran into this problem. Detroit has a very large Arab American population. Many of them are second or third generation, but they still have this culture where hospitality is critical. if somebody comes to your home, you have to offer them refreshment, right? And so they said, and their news organization said, you know, journalists cannot accept anything. And they said, we cannot cover the Arab American community if we can't accept like the cup of coffee or these hospitality. Like my integrity can't be bought for something as small as a cup of coffee. And the news organization had to change. And I think it was at the Free. It was at the Free Press.
Really? So they changed.
And they had to soften it. They're like, okay, well, nothing of significant value because you have to give the journalist the ability to be human, right? And the same thing, you know, if the journalist can pick up the tab for a lunch or something like that with a source that's not considered unethical, although there was a time when that was considered, you know, you're buying their lunch, therefore you're buying their favor.
Well, you know, we like to say that these things don't, we like to say these things don't happen in our society, but let's go back to when Richard Nixon was out of office and David Frost paid him obscene amounts of money for that. There's a graduate here, you may know him, Rudy Maxa, who Rudy was a travel writer, and he told me once many years ago that he did a story about a Saudi prince who bought, I think he bought a fancy house in Washington, and he did sort of a little lighthearted feature on him. And as he left, he was given a box with a Rolex watch. All right. Well, which he wisely said, I can't take that. But I think culturally it was thought that that was acceptable. And also I'm saying we have standards, but you've been reading about this concept of catch and kill. Do you know about this? This came up in the Trump scandal about Stormy Daniels. So basically Trump had a friend who ran the National Enquirer, which is sort of a scandal newspaper, who bought the story of this woman, another woman, and then killed it, didn't publish it. So it was basically
exclusive rights.
with exclusive rights.
They bought it saying, we have the story, you can't share this with anybody else, and then they just didn't run the story.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they paid her for it. And, you know, she thought initially it's going to appear, but basically all they were doing was helping Trump by killing the story so it wouldn't see the light of day. And fortunately that became disclosed.
Sorry. The same story that was caught, like you say, catch and kill. Won't she be able to repurpose it? I mean, same facts, but repurposing it.
I don't think so. I think that became an issue, doesn't
So-
it? Because it was exclusive rights.
So there was the Trump hired his personal attorney to basically bribe her. That was off the books. That was an unofficial bribe. And that's why that was able to eventually come out. Usually with catch and kill, there's a contract. So if you violate the contract, you not only have to pay the money back, but there can be penalties and things like that. So it's a legal agreement.
So if I'm really we can we take what we can for public interest's sake, for goodness sake. I mean, wouldn't I be able to pass on that story to somebody that can work on it? I mean,
Well,
differently, really.
You might.
Not same as she company, but repurposing it, different areas, but same facts.
I don't
At
think
least
so.
You could have done something better for your country.
I mean, the
Yeah.
answer is you can, but if it's a catch and kill contract, then you're violating the contract and you could face some very serious litigation from somebody who's got way more lawyers than you do. You know,
So in the end,
average
it's not
Supreme-
worth
If
it.
you take something to the Supreme Court, and something like that would, because it involves a presidential candidate, it takes anywhere from $2 to $3 million in legal fees to get your case decided by the Supreme Court. And that's not a guarantee that they'll rule in your favor. It's outrageously expensive to litigate at that level. And so that's where the big guys always have an advantage. Major industries, industry groups, major media, they almost always have an advantage in the court system because they've got the money. They'll have a team of lawyers to your one. One lawyer case almost never makes it to even the Court of Appeals. And one lawyer alone, you're looking at anywhere from $250,000 to $500,000 in legal fees just to get to the appeals court.
It's tough. You had a question.
Yeah, no, this whole issue about brown envelope journalism. It's an interesting anecdote from a South African journalism professor. You may be familiar with Anton Harbour? No.
Mm.
So he's at the Wits University in South Africa. And we've had brown envelope scandals in South Africa as well, you know, with politicians paying off journalists for positive media coverage and so forth. So Anton Harbour decided he's going to propose that journalists and college professors in journalism must set a certain standard and they must raise the bar to a certain level. So he volunteered to make public disclosures about his own income. And he put it on his website at the university, said, this is what I earned, these are my interests, these are my investments, and I do not get paid off by politicians. We do not pay journalists to run stories. This is how transparent. It's a kind of a open book disclosure.
In a way, it's a personal ethics code.
Yeah, so that's right. You were talking about it earlier. So I'm thinking that these are individual choices that journalists can make or editors can make, and it might be useful for the reputation of a publication to do so. It might be a bit too far, you know, to take to the extreme, maybe the way that Anton Harbour did. But it's an example of people who are really concerned about the integrity, about the reputation, that they do things like that in order to create public awareness of integrity.
I really agree with that. And I'm now trying to think of the guy that I'm going to mention here, but he was the former deputy Washington bureau chief of the Wall Street Journal, who became one of the most prominent technology writers in America. Wish I could remember his name, but he was the first to really start these personal ethics codes. And I remember reading his, and it was exactly what you're talking about. And he sort of made it funny, but he said, I deal with software releases and people send me, here are my standards. And he basically said, you can send me a piece of software, but when I'm done with it, I'm going to send it back to you. You can send me computer hardware to analyze. I'm going to send that back to you. If you send me a book or something, I'll review the book, but then it goes to a library. I mean, it was so explicit. And I remember he even got into, he made it sort of fun. He said, I get t-shirts all the time with company logos on them. My wife hates them. Please stop sending them, you know, things like that. But I really do think, because that's a good idea, because my time as ombudsman taught me that there is such a low negative understanding of what we do. There's just an assumption we're all on the take. And it's partly because many news organizations that we don't consider mainstream routinely pay for things. There's a program here called TMZ. I don't know if you ever have TMZ, but it's all celebrity news. And it's a difficult discussion when they say, yes, we paid for this information. On the one hand, it's anathema to what we do. But the reality is that some of the information they pay for that turns out to be true actually is good that it's in the public domain. There was a famous football player here, our football, not what we call soccer. And this guy played for a professional football team, the Baltimore Ravens. He got in an argument with his wife in an elevator, as they were about to get in an elevator in a hotel, and absolutely cold cocked her, knocked her unconscious. The explanation initially was that she had fainted, maybe she had too much to drink, but TMZ got someone, they paid someone to give them the security footage, which clearly showed him just knocking her out cold. All right, well, part of me says it's unfortunate we pay for information like that, but the other part of me says we would have never known. So it's not so clear cut. But I think
mean, journalism is we use the metaphor of the big tent. There's lots of types of forms and approaches to journalism. We're talking, when we talk about journalism, we're talking about community news, or legitimate news, or things like that. TMZ is tabloid journalism.
Yes.
Pure and simple, like the National Enquirer. They've always, paying for information is just part of the cost of doing business, right? They also have paparazzi, whose job it is, these are photographers whose job it is to harass celebrities in public spaces. Famously, the paparazzi chased Princess Diana to her death, that kind of thing. We also have a branch of journalism, mostly in the magazine area, but it's not just print magazines, it's also online magazines and TV magazines, mostly travel and food related, where the journalists are absolutely paid airfare, hotels, comped meals, without any, it's like, how can I write about this Viking river cruise on the Danube if you don't give me a complimentary room and things like that? It's just the way they do business. And it's completely invisible to the audience. The audience can't tell the difference between that journalism and the very serious, honorable journalism that's being
Which
done
I
by
think gets to your point here about us distinguishing ourselves in that way. You know, believe it or not, I read Vogue magazine. I'm sort of fascinated by mainly women's fashion, and
It's Bev's subscription.
it's my wife's subscription, yes. But how many times, for all of you men who read Vogue, how many times have you seen a 2-page spread on this spring's best purses? And the #1 purse is a Prada purse. And then the next page you turn is a full-page ad for Prada. I mean, you know what happened. They could have selected from among 100 purses, but Prada is the advertiser.
I once worked for a newspaper, and the editor and the publisher were people of low repute. Let's just put it that way. I've never had a boss I disrespected more than this editor and this publisher. For example, they forbade us to run letters to the editor that were critical of the newspaper. Yeah, really bad.
So much for the free press.
Yeah, sure. Well, that's the fun part, right? So they decided we had an automotive supplement that ran once a week, and it was basically just a front for the car dealership ads. And it had like wire reviews or profiles of new cars and things like that. And it was all done by the advertising department. The newsroom had nothing to do with it. And so we were okay with it. It was advertorial content, stuff like that. It was paying the bills, et cetera, et cetera. Well, the publisher and the editor, not just the publisher and the ad director, but the editor came up with this idea with the local car dealerships, that the car dealerships would allow the reporters to test drive a car for a whole week. They basically lease us a car for a whole week in exchange for a positive review of the car. Yes, and they let us choose the car. Now, half of the newsroom, those of us who went to Big Ten universities, Northwestern, Penn State, we were like, are you kidding? No. It's like, not only are we not going to participate, we are going to object strongly to the very idea of this. We had a few others who came from Western schools who's like, I get to drive a red convertible for a week. Yes, please. I've got a date on Friday. Or it's like, oh, my car's a jalopy. I would like to have a nice car so I have reliable transportation for a week. And it was shocking to a lot of us who went to programs where professional ethics was part of the curriculum to see how willing some of our colleagues were pretty good reporters overall. It's not that they were bad people, but they didn't have any kind of ethical training. They didn't have an ethical framework. They didn't see what the problem was.
Yeah.
And the car dealer said, if you don't like the car, that's fine. You just can't write a negative review.
See, I am so intrigued by this. We are now digressing a little bit, but back when I was doing some teaching here, I taught an ethics course. And one of the things, and I've done this when I've given speeches to audiences, I typically ask them, if you look back in American journalism the last 100 years, where would you think we are in terms of ethical conduct, with 0 being here like the worst and here being perfect ethical conduct? Where would you think right now we are? Most people think we're like way down here. You know, it's just that we're terrible. The ethics are, there are no ethics in journalism. And what I have to tell them, and this may be shocking even to you, we are so much more ethical than we were 100 years ago. And here would be a good study for a student, at least in America, or maybe it worked from South Africa. 100 years ago, when all we had with newspapers, all right, go back and try to find corrections in the newspaper. Very few appeared. And the reason was, if you made an error and you went to the reporter and said, well, you just screwed me, you did this, the reporter could basically say, well, we'll get it right next time, you know, and that's the end of it. And maybe there's a correction if the person complaining knew the publisher or threatened a legal action. But that is completely unethical then. And journalists were on the take. Even when I began at my first newspaper here, I remember I was seated at a desk probably about as big as these here, And next to me was the business editor. And at Christmas time, his desk was laden with gifts for expensive liquor and things like that, gift certificates from the people he covered. But there was a shift that began. It was, I remember it was called reporter power, where basically journalists, maybe of my era, were starting to say, this is completely wrong. And suddenly you started to get ethics policies at news organizations and all that. But in many ways, there's so much more transparency now because it's so easy to get called out on when you do something unethical. Now there's much more media now, but it's a different
Well,
thing.
the other thing is adopting the principle that if we do something wrong, really wrong, we're not just gonna run a little correction, we're going to basically fall on our swords. We're going to do right on the front page. We screwed up, we really screwed up badly. That creates a false perception that the media is unethical because they keep making all these mistakes. When in reality, what could be more ethical than admitting to their mistake?
Mm-hmm.
There's ways to leverage that. It's like, a marketing campaign. We try not to make mistakes, but when we do, we make it right. We're trying to sell that we're accountable and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the same with like food products. Like my vet was explaining to me, why I should be feeding a certain type of dog food. And I was like, well, that dog food occasionally has recalls. And he's like, yeah, that's how you know it's a good company.
Mm-hmm.
Because the company will recall a bad batch. The companies that never have recalls, it's not that they don't have bad products, it's that they're too sneaky to say when they do.
Right. And to Bill's point, this is why I very much still believe in the role of an ombudsman. Because yes, you're criticizing. I mean, probably 75% of the columns I wrote or the blog posts I wrote about the Washington Post were whacking them for doing something wrong. And they hated it. The editors hated it. They don't have ombudsman now. I think it's part because they can't take the criticism. But I will tell you, it built credibility with the Washington Post. I could tell because when there was a big screw up, there's this immediate backlash. The paper's corrupt and all this. The minute I wrote about it and explained what went wrong and why they did something wrong, it was amazing the number of people that would get back and say, well, I don't like the fact that they did it that way the first time, but I admire you for owning up to it. It's a similar thing. The Washington Post, when I was there, the Washington Post, I wrote a lot about corrections because I thought they handled them very badly. The Washington Post, on average, in the years I was there, averaged 1,000 corrections. So for many people per year, for many people in the public, they thought this is terrible. What I would have to tell them is, yeah, corrections are never a good thing, but they're correcting. Those are 1,000 times when they said we made a mistake. And really, when you think about the volume of news being processed through the Washington Post, it is a phenomenal fire hose of information.
I mean, 1,000 errors a year against 200-300 original pieces of content daily.
Yeah, it's remarkable. So, yeah. So anyhow, we're off the bat. Now, let me give you my final two. The next one was, there's something that I've seen some people experimenting with that I think it's very interesting. When you write a story that is based on some reader's suggestion. Now, some news organizations are at the bottom of the story thanking the reader for the tip. And I think that's a very clever thing because it's basically saying you can talk to the news organization and we appreciate it when you tell us things. I just think it's a small thing, but I think it's pretty good. The final thing is how you ask questions of readers. And this gets to how you engage with them in any form. Let's just take the topic of guns in America. If you're doing like a mini survey, your starting question might be, do you own a gun or don't you own a gun? And if somebody says, no, I don't own a gun, or yes, I do, then
Or more, why?
well, that is the key question. So the next one is, why do you own a gun? But
No, I
then,
was gonna say the response to the question, do you own a gun or not, is yes, no, and why do you want to know?
yeah, why do you want to know? But you do want to ask
Which is
people
yes.
next, why do you own a gun or why don't you? But I was reading something the other day that said those types of questions only take you so far with readers. And what you really want to know in that case is, the next question would be, what have you experienced that shapes your attitude toward guns? Journalistically, for me, as a reporter or an editor trying to find out, that is actually, I think, the most valuable thing. I think it's something we don't understand about guns. I mean, well, obviously we have a problem with too many guns in America, but maybe you own a gun because you hunted with your father. But the answer may be, in my neighborhood, people are constantly shot with guns, and so I think I need one for protection, or I will never own a gun. But I think the way we ask these questions of readers, we should be conscious of trying to elicit the information that actually leads us to better understanding and more stories. And the final thing I would say, just generally, we touched on it earlier, I think transparency in dealing with your audience is just increasingly important. Explaining how we do our jobs. How do we select the stories we select? What's the process? Why would anyone on the outside know that? How do we deal with sources? I'll tell you a scary study that was done by Duke University a couple of years ago. I'm going to forget the statistic on this, but they found in asking people that it was a phenomenally high percentage, like 70% of the people they asked about the use of confidential sources in stories. The readers who responded to the survey thought that a confidential or anonymous source meant that it was anonymous even to the reporter and the news organization. Now think about that. What they're really saying is these people think that somebody calls up on the phone, calls a news organization like the Washington Post and says, by the way, I need to tell you that Hillary Clinton is actually secretly married to Donald Trump and they got married on Mars. And then we put it in the paper. I mean, so the transparency of explaining how we deal with anonymous sources, what are the conditions, what's the terminology, all these things, how we handle corrections. I just think in any news organization, that's sort of paramount. So those are my 12. So I'm interested in what you all do in your own organizations to engage with the audience. Or do you? Do you have time to?
Well, I think it's a good idea to give some backstory as to if it's a tip off from the public, from the audience, or even an anonymous caller. It's useful to tell the backstory about where the investigation started and what led us to publish the story. That's quite useful. And very often it inspires another reader to say, look, I've got a similar story. I've got something that is, and if somebody could call in and it led to an investigation that uncovered some kind of wrongdoing, and maybe my story can also be heard. So it's useful to do that.
Even just with anonymous sources, I think readers often want to know, why you granted anonymity. But I think they also want to know so much more. They want to know, did you go to the source? Did the source come to you? Did you know the source before the source called you? I mean, those are all things that I think if it's critical to a story, I don't see any reason that you wouldn't share that with the reader as long as you're protecting the anonymity of the source that's come forward. And so we really think about that, I think. And these are things that we have a suspicious readership out there. So I think it's a good idea. Have we exhausted them? Yeah, right.
I look exhausted too. Chris,
yeah.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I just want to move now to the concept of fundraising. I know that I'm going back.
It's all about the money.
I just want to find out, do you have some kind of a method that you use? Because I can see the way that you speak, I can see the way that you engage, and is there some kind of funnel that you approach? Because in South Africa, we can't just call someone for a cup of coffee and then sit down with them and engage and ask for support, in a sense. Is there any kind of structured method that you use, which you just get to know the person a little bit better.
I think that's it.
And
I think it
relationship
first of all
building.
depends on whether you know them. So here's one method I have used. I'll just give you several options. When I started doing this, and I need to tell you, I'm not an expert at this. I'm just a guy who's trying to learn it, but I'm learning a lot about how you do it. People who have given to you and who are friends with people who have what we call capacity, meaning they can be your best friends. So one of the early large gifts I got was from someone who had given to us. And he started telling me about this other guy in the community that he said had capacity. I said, well, would you arrange a coffee where we can get together? Well, there's a sort of an innate built-in obligation of the new person here. He's looking, he said, well, Chris is my friend. He gave money. I better give money too. All right. So that's one method. The second thing I would say that I've learned is you have to play the long game. So I told you about this guy that I went to and said, I'm not going to ask you for money tonight. All right. Sometimes it takes multiple coffees. And sometimes I'm sure I've done this where they think, oh, not another coffee with Andy Alexander. You know, I'm done with him. So there's probably a sort of a sense of I'm wearing them down. But you build on those conversations. So let's say the second time you ask them about what do you think is important in the community? And they say, well, the big issue here is schools. Well, maybe the next time I have coffee, I say, well, in our latest journalism news calls, we talked about this and we are thinking about doing this coverage. I'm interested, Chris, in your thoughts on would that work? How would we tweak it? People like to, when they give money, I found that people don't just give money because I can give money. They care about their voice. They care about their contribution to the process. It's like they are making an investment of some form, both financially and intellectually, in what you're doing. So I think that's really important. And again, talking about community, you know, it's so obvious. People who have money in a community, it's their community. They love it. There's a reason they've lived there for 30 or 40 years. Otherwise, they would have escaped if they had a lot of money, you know? So I think that's important. But
so the knee-jerk reaction for most people if you approach that, send me a proposal. Where do I start?
yeah, that is a problem. That is a problem. But I think then you have to try and get to a step before that. And that's when you use other people, I think. You know, once you get into this also, we pay a lot of attention to what we call donor maintenance. So anybody who gives to us and then gives to us again, they get an official acknowledgement from our organization. Thank you for tax purposes. But they always get a personal note from me, typically handwritten, typically mailed. Thank you again for your contribution. Again, nobody has to give you money. And I think they like to know that that's been going on. And also we pay a lot of attention to major donors who gave one year but didn't give the next. and if they gave us $5,000 one year and then 3 years have gone by and we didn't get it, that's an alarm bell for us to find out, well, did they move? Did we do something that has offended them? Let's try and grab coffee. But it takes an enormous amount of time though. But you know, it's easy to be cynical about money, but when I became a bureau chief, I never thought about money. And these are during the years we were talking about this when we had just so friggin' much money, we didn't know what to do with it. And I had been the bureau chief for about a month, and the president of the newspaper division called me about a story we did, and he said, that's great. That was a really good story. So I was talking to one of my friends who was an editor at one of the papers, a sage old guy. And I told him about this. I said, it was so nice. We got a call from the president of the company. And he said, well, that is nice, Andy. He said, but let me just tell you, it's all about the money. And for those people it is, and it's easy to be cynical about that. But you know, you don't have journalism if you don't have the money. I mean, if you can't pay for it. So I have a different view. Now there's, you know, I'd like more money, but just give me enough to do the job and I'll be happy. So.
Andy, in your conversations with other fundraising experts that you were trying to get up to speed on this activity, I know it varies greatly depending on the cause, the economy and things like that, but what do you think is a reasonable success rate that says, okay, of the number of people I asked, this many opened their wallets?
Boy.
Like 1 in 4, less, more?
Let's put them in categories. If you're just trying to get money from the public, 1 in 100.
Sure.
That's great. But among people you've identified as having capacity, I would be personally disappointed if I didn't get money out of 50% of them that I had invested in a coffee or a lunch or something like that.
And that's with the Foothills Forum.
With
and that
Foothills
product.
Forum, yeah.
'Cause, obviously it's going to vary.
It varies tremendously. So are you all familiar with an organization called the Committee to Protect Journalists? Yeah, okay. So yes, okay. So I'm on the board. I've been on for 15 years. In fact, next month I'm finally going off the board. But for 10 years, I chaired their development committee. And it was a period of unprecedented growth. And I'm telling you that with the big caveat that I had nothing to do with that. We had a staff that really understood how to do that. And we just set policy. I had a tremendous committee, the head of the Ford Foundation. People really know this stuff. So it was easy for us. But some of the things I've learned about that type of thing is that when you're at that level, trying to raise like $8 million a year, and half the organizations like you in the world know precisely who has capacity and who you're going after. And it does get competitive there, And then I think at that level, you also have to be very careful of who you accept money from. So we accepted money from a guy you may have heard of, Peter Thiel. You know Peter Thiel?
The Committee to Protect Journalists.
Yeah, this goes back probably 8 years ago. He gave us $1 million. That was a big gift. This is a guy that co-founded PayPal and all that. Well, a couple of years later, we find out that he's funding lawsuits against journalistic institutions. So from a policy standpoint, we immediately, and I as chair, had to have the discussion. Number one, are we going after him again for money? And should we? Turns out we were not. Then the secondary question is, if he comes back and wants to give us $1 million again, do we accept it? The answer is no. We can't be accepting money from people who they have so much money that they're trying to look good with journalists, but behind the scenes, they're trying to screw journalists. You can't do that. So you have to be very careful of that.
That very issue.
Yes.
One of our most financially successful alumni, not of the journalism school, but of this college, is Roger Ailes. Roger Ailes was handpicked by Rupert Murdoch to create Fox News. Okay. And Roger Ailes donated an undisclosed amount of money. We didn't even know how much it was, but it came out to about like $350,000 or something like that to create a new newsroom, to be named the Roger Ailes Newsroom. Many of our journalism faculty bristled at the very idea of teaching students about ethical journalism in a newsroom with that name on it. But there it was. And we were trying to be ideologically agnostic about it. He was an alum, this was generous, et cetera, et cetera. But then he was accused of sexual harassment. And that was a line too far. And many of us were like, no, some of us were like, don't take the money in the first place. We don't like who we have to get in bed with, figuratively. And then it was like, ew, and so it was painful for us and it was a scandal for us, but we gave the money back and we removed his name.
Yeah. What Bill is getting at is one of the most difficult things when you get at the upper levels of fundraising. That is, where do you draw the line on who you take money from? And it is not always easy. When he originally proposed giving an additional gift before it was said that he would give it for the newsroom, if he was simply going, and this is before the sexual harassment thing, there were people who said he's just a bad actor in journalism. We shouldn't take any money from someone like that. Yeah, I did not agree with that. And here's why. If you look back in the history of journalism in America, the best student awards for journalism are the Hearst Awards. William Randolph Hearst, in our history of American journalism, is one of the biggest rascals you would ever find. I mean, so the question is, where do you draw the line? And I think a lot of it gets into whether the gift is in any way restricted. I'm not saying that was a wrong position, but I thought it was an arguable position. Now, one we dealt with at the Committee to Protect Journalists, which was very difficult to deal with, was you're all familiar with the Khashoggi execution or murder, all right, by the Saudis. The year after that happened, we at the Committee to Protect Journalists, we had an annual banquet in New York that is a huge fundraiser. We were bringing in on average $1.72 million in one night. That is a big haul for us, all right? There's a group called the Brunswick Group, international PR firm, that over a 15-year period had every one of those dinners bought a $50,000 table, all right? And they said, we want to do it again. But since Khashoggi's murder, they had accepted control of the account of Saudi Aramco, wholly owned by the Saudi royal family, to orchestrate their PR strategy for their public offering. And it was a big one. They were going to go public, all right? The staff of the Committee to Protect Journalists said, we can't accept money from anyone. And so it fell to me and my committee to try and unravel this. And it got down to talking to the head of Brunswick Group, asking them explicitly, do you deal with anyone in the Saudi royal family? Their claim is no. I have to accept them on their word. It may not be true. So the question is, where do you draw the line? And our concern, we ended up accepting the money, all right? But on the night of the dinner, the chair of the Committee to Protect Journalists in front of everybody didn't name them by name, but talked about the Saudi government and basically the need to hold these murderers accountable. But it's a very difficult thing because it's easy to say, no, we'll draw the line. You'd never accept money. But we have people that were giving us money representing major multinational law firms. We have no idea who their clients are. I mean, it could have been Osama bin Laden. You know, how would we know? And so once you start drawing the line, you have to have pretty clear understanding that someone was directly involved in something untoward. But it's not easy because it's a reputational thing. So these are all issues that you will never have to deal with. I'll tell you. Yes.
How was the transition from being an ombudsperson to being now in a media, in a forum? Were you able to adjust with the differences, with the challenges that you encountered?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's something I do on a volunteer basis, so it's not a job. It's just journalism. You know, the bigger professional adjustment I had to make was having been a reporter and running a newsroom that was absolutely played it down the middle, and then going to be ombudsman. Look, I understand how journalism should work and the ethical confines and all that, but rendering an opinion was oddly a very difficult thing for me to do, because when you're an ombudsman, readers do not want you to write a column that says, well, on the one hand, this is that. What they want is for you to render an opinion that they screwed up or they were right. And that was not easy for me. So.
Was my last full-time job in journalism was as an editorial page editor.
Same thing.
And after I got out, I found it really hard to not have an opinion anymore.
Oh, really?
Because
Yeah.
I wrote editorials every day.
Yeah, see,
I was damn good at it. But
yeah, he has an advantage. I think partly, I often say the reason people can't tell where I am ideologically is I often don't know where I am. I mean, I know right from wrong on basic things, but if you want to get into an argument with me about how to fund Social Security in the next 60 years, I don't know. I can go either way on that.
I did put our CFO, our chief financial officer, on the editorial board.
Ah.
Because I thought that was important. And he would frequently say, remind me again why we don't care what the advertisement.
And
True.
I'd like to ask, can you tell us about one or two of your greatest conflicts of interest that you had to deal with personally?
Conflicts or just things I dealt with at the Post?
Not necessarily the Post. I think when you were was it with the Post, eh?
Yeah. Mhm.
So I suppose that would be the area where you potentially face conflicts of interest or elsewhere?
Yeah. Conflict of interest. I don't think I ever had a big one. You know, it's something as a bureau chief I paid particular attention to because the company that owned us was a massive privately owned company. It was 20 billion in revenues annually and 90,000 employees. And aside from just newspapers and TV, they're into everything. They're into broadband, they're into sustainable agriculture and all that. And when you run a Washington bureau, you're constantly worried that you're writing a story about some topic and you don't disclose your own personal interest as a company. And the fact is, the company was so large, I didn't know a lot of it. So one of the things I ended up doing was they had an office there that was separate from ours that just represented the corporate interests of the company, lobbying, you know, trying to sway legislation on this and that. I had a quarterly lunch with the head of that office in which I would explicitly ask him, what are your big topics? You know, so that if we started to write about something like the regulation of the cable industry, we were deep into cable, that I would be able to say in a story, you know, the owners of this newspaper, Cox Enterprises, have a vested interest in this. I wrote about conflict of interest once in a column for the Washington Post. It was a rare column where I actually praised the Post. But they did a really clever thing. They were very good on disclosing self-interest. So at the time, the Washington Post was not owned by Jeff Bezos. It was owned, it was publicly traded, but controlled by the Graham family, the great Catherine Graham, and all these people. And on their board was Warren Buffett, great international investor, multi-billionaire. And I was intrigued by when they would write financial stories that involved Buffett or anyone else, whether they disclosed board members. And I found that the Post did a very clever thing. They rigged their computers so that anytime a story was being edited and it named one of about 30 people or companies that the Washington Post had a relationship with, it would stop the story from being published and sort of flag it. The equivalent would be when you fail to put your seatbelt on and it starts dinging, 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 dinging until you deal with it. And I thought that's actually a very good use of technology. So the column I wrote actually ended up saying they do a good job with this, and they do. And I think they still do. They, with Jeff Bezos, I've never read a story in the Washington Post that referenced Jeff Bezos without saying that he personally owns the Washington Post. So it helps. But you deal with those issues all the time.
Something at the Night River paper I worked at, because we had the same kind of thing. There were going to be built-in potential conflicts of interest. They weren't real, they were perceived conflicts, but they needed to be addressed, they needed to be acknowledged. And so we had names in our autofill, you know how like you set up your Microsoft Word so that if you type a couple of letters in combination, it'll spell out the big long thing. Those names would trigger automatically the disclosure text.
Interesting.
So you type the name and then immediately it would have the name and then the disclosure text that then we can copy and then move to where it needed to be, either above or below.
So
it's just
readers,
a simple little trick.
Readers may think that that's overboard and all that, but let me tell you, when you don't disclose, then somebody starts a social media campaign that says, aha, this story about Jeff Bezos, they never once disclosed that, again, their predisposed notion of journalists is that Bezos is in there editing the stories with his saying, keep my name out of it. Of course, which is not true at all.
It's like our publisher was on a lot of community boards. These community boards do newsworthy things. That was the kind of thing that would happen. Is we type in the name of the community board, automatically that's the publisher of the element is a member of the board.
Yeah, yeah. It's a big issue, transparency.
That way we couldn't forget to do it.
Is our work done?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Would you mind sharing your contact details?
Yeah, sure. In fact, I've got cards here. I came equipped, right?
Thank you very much.
And I shared the link to Foothill's forum with them.
Good. Thank you.
So they'll be providing that to you.
I think I'm going to run out here.